All my life I had idealized my mother. My father raised me alone and always told me that she had left when I was very little. In my child's mind, I built an image of her, beautiful, loving, full of affection, someone who had been unjustly taken away from me. And I always blamed my father for her absence. They said he was a hard and serious man, and I believed that his harshness had driven my mother away. As I grew up, that image took deeper root in my mind. On every birthday, every Christmas, I imagined what it would have been like if my mother had been with me. My friends talked about their mothers, and I filled with a nostalgia for something I never had. I constantly reproached my father, even during my teenage years when he tried to get close to me. "It's your fault she's gone," I would say over and over again. He would only look at me sadly and move on, without trying to change my perception. One day, after a particularly strong argument, my father remained silent for a moment, then sighed deeply and looked at me with a mix of weariness and sadness in his eyes. "All right," he finally said, "I'll tell you where your mother is." He gave me an address and a phone number. I felt strange. Would I finally find her? Would she be like I had imagined all these years? I took the first train the next day. The journey was long and filled with anxiety. I imagined the reunion over and over again. I saw myself running towards her, hugging her, crying together for all the lost time. However, there was something in my father's look when he gave me the address that disturbed me. I couldn't figure out if it was sadness, regret, or something else. I arrived at the address he had given me, a small house in a modest neighborhood. My hands trembled as I rang the doorbell. After what seemed like an eternity, the door slowly opened. There she was, my mother, the woman of my dreams. But something was not right. Her face was cold, emotionless. I was paralyzed for a moment, but then I ran towards her and hugged her. I expected her to hug me tightly, to tell me how much she had missed me. But her embrace was weak, almost non-existent. We went inside her house and I tried to talk to her, to fill the void with all the stories I wanted to share. But her answers were short, almost monosyllabic. I felt like I was talking to a stranger. I tried not to let it affect me, telling myself that maybe she just needed time. But with each passing minute, the reality became clearer. She was not the loving mother I had imagined. She seemed more concerned with anything else than with me. Finally, after what seemed like hours, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and left the house without saying a word. Tears began to stream down my face as I wandered aimlessly through the streets. Everything I had believed in, all the illusions I had held onto, crumbled in an instant. I returned to my father's house the next day. I didn't say anything when I entered. I locked myself in my room and cried until I had no strength left. He didn't try to talk to me, he just left me alone with my pain. Days passed before I could face him. When I finally did, I felt ashamed and guilty. I found him in the kitchen, drinking his morning coffee. I sat in front of him and finally spoke. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm sorry for blaming you all these years. I'm sorry for being so unfair to you." He looked at me with an expression of relief and sadness at the same time. "I never wanted you to go through this," he said softly. "Your mother, she was never like you imagined. I always tried to protect you from that truth. I didn't want you to suffer more than necessary." We stayed in silence, but it was a different silence than before. It was a silence full of understanding and acceptance. Finally, I understood that my father had always been there for me, trying to protect me, even when I didn't understand his way of doing it. The image of my mother, the idealized woman of my dreams, faded away, making room for a new reality. one in which I could begin to heal and appreciate my father for the strong and loving man he had always been.